I was wondering about. It's not just that it's less dark than some of the stuff of yours that we're familiar with, but that it seems to occupy quite a different kind of um, imaginary landscape. It feels very
Definitely.
domestic rather than kind of cavernous, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, like it was quite a nice way to explore something almost a bit pedestrian in where it kind of starts with almost a little bit kind of comical. Because I feel like the piece kind of maybe kind of starts out that way, but I don't think by the end of it you think that it's kind of like something like throwaway or kind of like, oh, that was funny. I think I like the notion of taking that kind of um, symbolism, as it were, of like things that are cute and just fluffy and um, homely and snuggly, and taking it on a journey uh, that may take it somewhere else, take it into slightly different realms, but kind of have that kind of nice sense of anchorage to make something quite different.
Sure.
Mm.
Yeah, it was a curious thing because we, premiered the piece, and then 3 months later we were in lockdown, I suppose, and a
Mm.
lot of people were in this situation
Yeah.
where they were in a domestic environment that was gradually becoming more and more oppressive, and it felt weirdly apposite for that piece.
Ah. Yeah, that's a good point. Couldn't have seen that one coming. Yeah, yeah, I guess so. I mean, I guess I always have this preoccupation with taking something or trying to take something that you think you know and maybe taking you on a journey where maybe you learn that it's a bit different from what you thought.
In terms of how the piece is actually made, or how you chose to make it, um, you sent it to us basically a complete a complete piece with when we hadn't really interacted much about what it was going to be. You just kind of gave us hints about um, the direction you were going in,
Mm.
um, and all the sounds are things that you're kind of in complete control of, as if it's in a sense we're just realizing something that you could play on your own if you had enough hands. Um,
It's always my problem. There's never enough
yeah,
hands.
yeah, right. Is that the way you always work when you're like are you is control a big part of how you like to work with ensembles and performers, or is that just context
It's sorry,
dependent?
it's fun. It's funny you should ask. I think I'm very used to um, music and sound very much being a vehicle for very kind of personal self-expression, um, and kind of therefore control being a very key part of that, kind of it being the means of something I can actually control in a world where that was kind of a minimum. Um, I think I sort of didn't feel like I had much control over like uh, well, I suppose like my body, my literal voice, this kind of thing. Um, and the what I end up presenting to the world isn't always really how I would like to be seen. So when given a tool with which I can divulge um, like a great degree of honesty, it therefore then becomes very important for me that I can have control of that narrative and be very honest, I suppose. So kind of very much coming from that kind of perspective of things, I guess. Does that
Mm,
make sense?
absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mm. And to be honest, I think for the largest part, that's why electronic music is such a tasty kind of opportunity, because you only give people the final product kind of thing. As time goes on, I'm more open to challenging that way of working. When I've made music in the past, it's always been on my own, but whenever I've kind of played music with other people, like, it's always been such a joyous thing. So kind of maybe kind of linking up the mindset of one and the mindset of the other, and kind of having them meet more in the middle, would be quite nice, I think. But I think that 𝑒𝑤𝑤𝑜 was a lot more fixed, in a sense, because I was very concerned with the practicalities of it, because I was aware that you were going to have to do a lot of tech stuff kind of remotely, which you did brilliantly, by the way, and trying to kind of see how much of a full palette I could cram into sort of two people with two hands each, and maybe feet. I mean, you do have feet, but whether or not you use them.
You've never seen them.
Maybe you don't. I assume too much.
As well, it's not only that, it's quite it's a kind of under control piece, or whatever, however you would describe it. It kind of takes place in this very electronic sounding environment as well, whereas something like The King has a lot more kind of intentional acoustic tactility, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
And that's in this piece, there's a real contrast between the sounds of, like, you know, the samples, and then the very I guess EDM sort of sounds that are in some other bits of it.
I think, yeah, like, that's kind of part of, because it's kind of it's not sort of not ultimately the first time I had kind of gone into territory that was a bit more kind of whimsical, but it was important to me that the freedom that comes with human players, for me, are kind of being able to kind of be whimsical with it in real time was very important. That should be a thing that can happen. Yeah, whereas I think The King has been the one that I've had the most trouble adapting to other ensembles, because in my yeah, as you say, it's got such a particular sound to it, which is a deliberate choice and a part of the whole thing. I'm kind of, when you kind of think of a group of players who will be in an acoustic space that may or may not resemble that at all, and kind of trying to make it its own thing. But I think I've only really been able to achieve that with some distance from the product. I think if you'd have asked me to do that kind of thing at the time, I think I would have tied myself in knots.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because LCO played Nocturning, is that right? At the Albert Hall?
Yeah. I chose that one for a reason. I was like, we can have some bombast.
Yeah.
If any space can take it, yeah, that's...
Well, that piece is an interesting, you know, saying adapting it for an acoustic ensemble, because it has this very marked, you know, side chaining effect being used between the organ and the bass drum.
Yeah.
Which is something you use in 𝑒𝑤𝑤𝑜 as well. And that kind of, how do you... I don't really know if I have a question at the end of this, but I suppose I was just thinking when today, before this interview, about the way you use quite marked production effects, and there's this kind of particular kind of virtuosity to having things that are very sort of in your face like that, but they're also very much balanced against the rest of the musical material. I mean, how do you think about your your role as a composer, but also as a sort of, you know, writing production techniques into your music in advance. That's
yes. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's been something that's developed a lot over time. When you make a lot of music electronically and you realize just how much control you have over the entire environment at your disposal, you realize what a powerful engine you possibly have. And I think it's very important. Therefore, I think the more you can turn things up to 11, so to speak, the better. Like if you want something incredibly forward, you can make it so forward that you think somebody's like licking your nose, you know. if you want something giant, you can have something intensely giant and like you've never been in a space that big. Like I think I feel a real duty to kind of be able to slap you in the face in the good way. in the good way. Like I don't really have any interest in making like a meh kind of experience. Like even if I want to make like a comfortable experience, then I want it to be really comfortable. Like, oh, I don't ever want to get out of this beanbag kind of. Do you know what I mean? Like I don't really have a lot of interest in making something that I feel about. And I think that trying to kind of harness production to make things the best version of the thing that it can be, like I know it's a fairly like regular technique to kind of sidechain stuff so the drums can cut through, but like it's good. It's a like I think I find real joy in the clarity of good percussion sounds, like good percussive sounds. I mean, all sounds anyway, but something you want to bite in half and there's a jelly center.
Yeah, I mean, but the way you use, I mean, let's stick with the sidechaining example because we've started talking about it. But the way you use that in 𝑒𝑤𝑤𝑜, it's not just that it's good drum production; it becomes a kind of compositional parameter, right? So in the first half it's one way, and then the second half you get this feeling like it's starting to take over the whole thing. It's really, I would say, I mean, I don't want to tell you what your music is and isn't, but you know, it kind of goes beyond just a production technique. It starts to become part of the fabric of the, like, without that effect, that piece would be really different.
Yeah, no, definitely. No, and this is good. Like I'm always pleased if somebody talks to me about what I've written and they've got something to say along those lines. Like, oh, if it was super, if that wasn't there, then yeah, no, I'm pleased about that. I think it's also kind of just a case of oh, sorry, the cat is gonna brush the microphone. Come on, slightly that way. Okay. It's also, I feel, a case of trying to make the most of what you've got. I think, like the more weight anything can pull, the better. So if I'm doing a drum part and I put a little bit of side chaining in and I'm like, oh, that's quite nice, and then oh, but what if it really kind of ooh, this could be a thing, like
Sure.
trying to draw the most that you can out of whatever it is you've got going on, which I think is really something very much at the heart of that piece in particular. Like four hands, a more limited sound palette than I have done previously, but still one where a lot can be conjured from it. I think that was very important to me. Like I was pleased at kind of like this kind of almost like fugue sort of thing that happens in the first half, and then this massive row in the latter. Like I was very pleased with the kind of the journey that kind of takes you on, and kind of like you feel like you've ended up somewhere very kind of different, but also it makes sense because you kind of end up at kind of like a dreamscape and a child is laughing, and it's like, yeah, okay, yeah, sure.
That piece obviously works as a recording, or like as a piece that you could realize in the studio and there are no performers involved. How do you think that's different from seeing two people on stage performing it?
Yeah, it's kind of because of unfortunate circumstance, I've never actually gotten to see the both of you perform.
I almost forgot.
Yeah. Which like actually of all the pieces I've written, this is kind of the one I'd like to see perform the most, because that was very much again at the heart of writing it, and very much with the hope that like there's kind of opportunity for the kind of like nice interplay, and like it's a little dialogue between the both of you. And especially with the giant row, like I would like to see that happen in a live space, just because of the nature of how we tend to rehearse music for concerts, i.e. there's often not tons of time, especially if you got to write the piece as well. We kind of don't get a lot of time to focus on the performance aspect of it, the performative aspect of it as like composer and performers. So yeah, it would be really nice to be able to kind of explore that you are two physical people playing physical instruments in a real place. That would be really fun to look more into.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, there's something exciting about the fact that the acoustic environment is so artificial, effectively, and yet it's being created by two people that are very, their actions are very physically visible. There's a kind of interesting contradiction there that's exciting, I think.
Totally. Like ever since I started doing electronic music anyway, whenever it came to performance of any kind, there's always that question of how are you going to do it? Because for me personally, I've always wanted to avoid that problem where maybe you are doing a million things at the same time on a laptop, but nobody can see what you're doing. And again, that might not be by any means the worst problem in the world if you're making a decent sound. But if I'm going to get out my chair and pay to go on the bus and go to a place and buy a drink, then might as well make the most of getting people out and being in a place. I feel kind of, maybe kind of as well now more than ever, I'm really excited about the notion of spaces again.
One more question about this concert. The whole kind of loose theme is about the encroachments on personal identity, whether that's from sort of technology or people getting too famous and forgetting who they are, or people being tortured into a fugue state, or whatever. Do you think your piece fits into that theme? Not necessarily the torture, but
I hope not the torture.
Yeah.
It's always interesting to think about the way in which technology mediates what we're exposed to. It's funny, right? Because the reproduction on a synth of a cat going meh is inherently funny. It's funny how much taking a sound out of its original context, when compared to the toddler. Weirdly, I feel like you hear a toddler out of context, and I don't know, maybe you think it sounds maybe more saccharine, or perhaps maybe it does conjure like warm feelings, or reminds you of like a friend's child or something along those lines. It's kind of interesting to kind of consider how tech kind of changes their identities by context alone, almost.
Totally.
Yeah.
And putting the toddler in that musical context of very obviously synthesized music surrounding it sort of makes me think of I don't know, Instagramming your kids or something.
Yeah, right. Because like I was very careful to ask permission of my friends to. Could I please record your child?
Of course, I didn't mean it in the,
Yeah.
in the sense that you were doing it.
But maybe to kind of go off that point, like I guess the piece kind of starts out and it is more kind of like kids television, like meow 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 meow. But kind of the fact it gets displaced quite a bit and then turns into kind of like a rave at the end, like leaves a lot of interpretation for what exactly did happen along the way.
Sure.
Which I'm pleased about.
Right.
Kind of like leaving an ambiguous space that you could take quite a lot away from, hopefully.